All right. Well, welcome to another edition of Through a Therapist's Eyes. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Gazdick, and he is Craig Graves. As always, I am still a mental health and substance abuse therapist. And are you still a coach, sir?
Last time I checked.
All right. Got a book coming out soon after a little while, and you have launched with your coaching career to grow. So we welcome you to Through a Therapist's Eyes, the podcast. Seeing the world through the lens of a therapist and a coach, being aware this is not the delivery of therapy services in any way. Checking out the website Through a Therapist's Eyes, where you can get full show transcriptions. And Mr. Neil, our producer, has been working hard to get us now closer to having books listed on there that we've talked about and categories that you can search. So we're asking now that we're kind of a little bit reborn and refired up here with shows every Wednesday coming out. We want to ask you to help us grow. You do make the show go. Subscribe. That puts us on an automatic download. You said that last week, Craig. Is that a true statement?
Yes. When you subscribe, it should download automatically when new shows are released.
I never realized that.
Yes.
I was glad you pointed
That's
that
true.
out. Share an episode specifically with a friend. They're more likely to listen to it and catch the good shows that we produce. So help us out. And when you go to this new website, Through a Therapist's Eyes, hit the donation button. Don't forget that's out there. So, Craig, this is the human emotional experience. And I think we got some serious things to try to figure out together today. What do you think about that?
Yep, I think so.
We've taken some time off the last few weeks. I told you when we started doing shows, we were going to kind of, take it a little bit easy after we did those tough ones coming back. We've done some things on, mental health tips, strategies. We've done a show on burnout, really taking care of yourself. And then we did a show on nutrition and the cornerstones of what we do in my office were really kind of, touched on. And we're diving back into a pretty tough one today. This is a tough issue that we're dealing with today. And I hope that people are tuning into it, because I think that we have a lot of really good ideas, because it's still, tough time with the pandemic, tough time with policing in our country and race relations. And there's just, there's still a whole lot going on now. And, we didn't talk about it last week, Craig. I think we forgot, but we made a challenge and a suggestion to our audience to take 2 weeks off, right? 2 weeks off of the news. And so now people can start tuning back in, seeing what's going on. And this show might be perfectly timed for that. We have a guest that's going to join us this evening. Well, we're recording it this evening, so it's whenever you're watching it, I guess, the morning, the afternoon, the evening, or maybe midnight. Who knows? Is it okay? I didn't ask you, ma'am, if it's okay to use your full name today.
Yeah.
Okay. So Carole Shrader is with us. And Craig, she's with us with, we sometimes, Carole, we have, I was told that's Carole with an E, by the way, too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we can't leave the E off. I was told that very distinctly. So a lot of times we'll have, experts on, guests, people who've written books and all this kind of stuff. And we haven't had for a little while. It's why I'm excited about tonight, because we have a different flavor, Craig. She's coming at this issue of, I titled the show Equipping the Police, Defunding Reframed, so that we're reframing and talking about what is meant by defunding the police and the issues with race relations and police brutality, all those things you've been seeing, in the news with somewhat of a personal touch, Craig. So she gave me some information to kind of introduce you. And then Carole, I'll kind of turn it over to you. Oh, no, wait a minute. Before I do that, I wanted to start the show off absolutely by highlighting, and this is just Chris Gazdick speaking, so that you know where I'm coming from myself. And Craig, I'm wanting to speak for you, but I want to express that I support the men and women that are executing the laws in our nation in the police. I think it's important that we recognize that. I think it's crucial that we understand the mental health factors that go into that. We do have an issue in the psychology world called groupthink, where somebody starts thinking a certain way and you get great polarization. And I'm very concerned that we've got some serious broad strokes that are going out there about our men and women that are policing. Be careful about joining the crowd all the time. Think for yourself, recognizing that, we have a massive, massive issue I think, with the police and the things that you see in the news, where mental health is right smack in the middle of this thing. I don't think it's periphery. I don't think that it's a parallel. I don't think that it's a minor issue. I think it's right smack in the middle of this thing. And maybe by the end of the night, I'll be able to make an argument for that. But, you know, I support the men and women in policing and the men and women in our military. And we learned in the Vietnam era when men, mostly men at that time, not as much women, were coming back from the war, and we spat on them and we treated them with terribly disrespectful and horribly so in many instances. And I don't like watching that. I don't like seeing that. People that are struggling with PTSD in the military are accepted now. Well, I believe that is a major issue in our policing today as well. And these men and women that are serving us and helping us in our communities do need the respect and support from our society, I do believe. So I wanted to start out that way. Should I jump off a soapbox?
Keep going, man.
All right. So Carole's got some stories, though, because we also have the other side of mental health that also has a great problem in how to handle it. And a lot of times police circumstances are coming right up against this tough as nails issue with mental health. So Carole, welcome to Through a Therapist's Eyes. I am understanding that you kind of come from this whole angle as a white middle-aged woman. I might say, Craig, on a Zoom link, she looks quite young.
Thank
I don't know what middle-aged is. I'm with you, though. Yeah. 2 beautiful grown daughters who keep her young and keep her searching. Youngest of 6 kids with loving parents, is a foundation that's kept you close as a family, even as your parents have both passed. Raised in an Assembly of God church that created a culture and an attitude of trusting God and searching for the truth and guidance in the Bible. At the age of 11, her older sister ran away, and when her parents finally found her, she was in the midst of literally, Craig, a psychotic break, ended up hospitalized. We did a show, Craig, on the Nut House. Remember that? Mm-hmm. It ain't no nut house. It's a place where people do get well, but she was hospitalized. Ended up in family therapy with her as part of her process. And that experience started a journey that Carole says, facing the beast that is mental illness. And Carole, I can appreciate that comment of it being a beast because it does take over people's lives. I'm passionate about mental health. So through the years, other families have dealt with issues of bipolar to depression, and until in your early 30s, you always had a fear like that was in your mind. I'd be curious to hear what you mean by that. That you can lose touch with your own reality, like your sister did, but you were successfully raising your own children to appreciate the fragile balance of mental health, and to take measures to give yourselves the best opportunity to stay in a healthy mindset, which is what I'm all about in my practice. So mental health was not foreign to you, and it also was not taboo. It was okay to talk about, to deal with, and something that affected people that you loved and respected. And because of this, you don't look down on it. You deal with it through a non-judgmental lens, and trying to give an opportunity to have that sentiment be spoken out to, whenever you have an opportunity to do so. How did I do, ma'am? Who is Carole, and what I miss?
I think you did pretty good. That kind of sums it up. You mentioned how you to elaborate on my fear of myself having a mental illness or having a psychotic break. And when I was 11 years old, and I think that's such a crucial age anyway for a child to have something traumatic happen. And I just remember so well that being in the emergency room with my sister, and it was so surreal because she was just in a fantasy world. And I just remember her talking to me, and I didn't realize it was a psychotic break. I just thought, oh, this is like cool make-believe. And then, of course, I realized as I got older, obviously, it was mental illness and what it meant to kind of lose yourself in that. And so it just was something that was always in the back of my mind. Like I said, dealing with the beast that is mental illness, it's like always lurking there in the dark. And is it going to affect me? And it wasn't until, like I said, I was in my early 30s, I finally started feeling like I was safe, that I wasn't, because I do, I have the mood swings, and I have some, minor depression type situations, but I finally started to realize maybe I was going to be okay. And what I will preface that is I've always valued, getting good sleep, watching whatever medications I take. I mean, all those things, because I'm not a doctor, but I, realized that it appeared from my family history that I, share some of that. I must be predisposed because I do have I have a couple of family members that are bipolar, have family members who deal with severe anxiety and, and things like OCD and debilitating type conditions, that require medication and therapy. And so,
yeah, well, what's funny, Carole, I'll just jump in and honor that, because, this is particularly the segment is all about you and the experience, that you can speak to, that it really is like a beast, I mean, and there is a predisposition, and people really are fearful of this, which is part of what we've tried to do on this show, right? Like, to break down the myths and stereotypes and stigmas that are out there. And, you might know a whole lot more about it than I ever pretended to remember to know, because when you're living this stuff, as you mentioned, OCD and bipolar, and, I mean, there's a lot that has been in around in your family, is what I'm hearing. Is that so?
That is so. And that's, and I'll even state, I by no means consider myself a mental health expert. I mean, that's why I value the opportunity. I've wanted to share my story, and I've wanted, I have a compassion for issues, and I just want to normalize the conversation. Like I said, I call myself, a middle-aged white woman, and I feel like if I just talk about it, and I have my sister, I have a sister that we, have shared some stories here lately, and specifically talking about, the subject, the defunding the police, that terminology. And I like how you're saying, address it as, equipping or re-equipping. But she has dealt herself with some mental illness, and a close family member of hers is dealing with mental illness. And I know I have a more progressive thought. I'm on a journey, and that's what I'll state now in a podcast that's going to go out in the public. If I say something today that 10 years from now someone's going to judge me for, I'm going to just say right now, I'm on a journey, and I'm discovering, and I'm just saying what my experiences are and how I feel. And so those are things that I've been sharing with a sister of mine who didn't quite have an understanding of what I meant when we talked about defund the police. And so I love how you kind of changed the terminology a little bit, because I think it's important to have terminology that people understand, and re-equipping actually might relay the information better to someone like my sister, because once we started talking about some circumstances and about defunding the police, and then I have a story to share, in fact, about her going to the emergency room with a family member that kind of was an epiphany moment with her.
Okay.
In regards to mental illness. So I tried to explain to her that defunding the police, we're not taking money away, but, when it comes to mental illness, there is not a support system necessarily within the police department. And so close family member of hers, he was a young man. He dealt with.
Well, I guess real quick, let me jump in there, Carole, before you go to that, to say that, I really appreciate what you're saying there, because we really all on a journey. And I think our nation is on a journey. And, it's funny because we think of, we have such a short-term memory. Craig, how long has our country even been in existence?
A little over 200 years.
Okay, there are countries that have been in existence times 10 or 20 or,
right, yeah.
Or shall I say 30 of that, right? And so I think that we have to recognize where we are as a country with this issue and these types of issues as well. The progress that is made, the progress that's not enough. There's a lot of people still hurting. There's just a lot of people really still in pain and anguish and have trauma and mental health in the middle of that. And so if we recognize it that way, Carole, about, like you said, if you say something 10 years from now and as different from now, like that, that needs to be okay. That needs to be part of what we're doing when we say, let's make things better. Like we're trying to grow as a person. I mean, this is what we say with our show, Craig, right? Let's figure this thing out together. We're trying to grow The tagline of Metrolina Psychotherapy Associates, where I work, is working with you towards emotional growth. But
Right,
yet we
absolutely.
think about it in such a black and white term. And I don't mean racial, I mean concrete or, absolute terms. It doesn't need to be that way. So I really appreciate that, Carole.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I feel like that I've had growth and my eyes being open, and that I've always had the feeling with that it's not fair to public officials, whether it's the police or or even therapists, and there needs to be proper training and support networks for the people dealing with the mentally ill. As mentally ill needs support and need networks, but the people dealing with them also need that support. And it's like the police. It's not fair. I feel like it's not fair the police to be put in situations that they're not equipped to handle.
Listen, if you are coming across mental health, can we make that point, Carole? If you're a parent with a child and you identify significant mental health issues, and I'm not talking about some of the basic things either, because we talk about mental health, we all have mental health. I think you can agree with me when we're talking about this, we're talking about, maybe we almost need a different term, like, significant mental health issues, that need to get identified, that lead to like chronic hospitalization and chronic bipolar disorder. And, addiction is a terrible beast, Craig, we've talked about on this show a whole lot, because these are things that when you come across, I, as a therapist, look, I have got to take care of myself. You as a sister, as you say, I would imagine, I need to take care of yourself. When you're supporting and coming in close contact with this, you have to debrief. You have to take care of yourself. And when you come across it professionally or personally, it doesn't matter. And police officers come across it a lot, I would say.
Right. And I'm sure, because if you consider, just doing some research before I talked with you tonight to have some background. I am not an expert. I did want to be somewhat informed. But, the statistics I looked at, that 15 to 20% of, people in our prisons have serious mental illness, and anywhere from like 50 to 65% have mental health problems.
It's an issue.
There's no way that police officers aren't coming into contact with mentally ill people on a regular basis with those type of statistics.
50% of time, yeah.
Yeah, and so, it's like, and that's the thing, even if 15 to 20 are severe, if you have 50 or more that has mental health problems, as we've seen too much here lately, especially, and then I even, have experiences from years ago, that a small situation can escalate. So even if someone it's not a serious mental health problem, it's still something that can escalate. So there's so much opportunity for things to go terribly wrong.
Craig, crunch those numbers for a second. Let me say this to you, see what you think. Judging Carole by what you just said, Craig. So look, 50% of the people probably have some sort of mental health, and I'm going to say substance abuse issue in their life. That doesn't sound too crazy to me. Does that sound crazy to you at all?
I have no idea.
You really?
Well,
yeah.
and the statistic I pulled it said, jail or inmates.
Okay, well, think about this though. So 50, we'll just that doesn't sound crazy to me at all. And every person that a police officer comes in contact with doesn't go to jail, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of people that have, or actually I said that wrong. Everybody that has mental health issues that police come in contact with don't go to jail or prisons. So I would submit to you, there's a high percentage of people that they do come in contact with that have it. If we just add on 15 or 20% of that time, I was just thinking about how like 60, 65, 70, maybe as high as 75% of the time when they're coming in a pretty significant contact, that probably has something to do with mental health or substance abuse. Are you following me when I'm saying that? Does that sound kind of legit possibly?
Possibly so, yeah.
That's a lot. And I've never thought of that before, but that's a lot. Listen, when I say mental health is key front center in the center of this thing, I think that's pretty significant factor of that. So I don't know. That was just blowing my head away. Carole,
and I think, and too, as a therapist and a substance abuse therapist, from what I've read, it does seem like the problem, worse now than it's been 5-10 years ago and so I can see where that number would be so high and who people and the police are coming in contact. So
we got a lot to cover, and I've took you away from your story. What happened that you wanted to share?
Okay, police interaction. So I have a family member, a young man, he's bipolar, has substance abuse issues that more than likely stemming from self-medication and growing up. And so he had, I believe he had been drinking, and he was apparently suicidal, and another family member that he was with in the home, they were kind of at their wits' end and scared for him. A situation that had escalated, which is very common with having family members that are mentally ill. When you see them kind of going down a slippery slope, there's a tingle that something's not quite right, and then normally you're like, you get to the point where this isn't good and I can't handle it. You try, and the last thing you want to do is to put them in a situation where you have to call in someone, the police, or escalate. Well, in this situation, there was a danger for this young man's life, this family member, and so 911 was called. Well, what happened was once 911 came in, and the police came in, and he was upstairs, and they went upstairs to this room, and he had a knife, and the knife was, my understanding is the knife was at his throat. And when the police officer went to subdue him or interact with him, everything happened in a pretty crazy manner. So I don't know exactly all the details, but there was a knife. It was at his throat. The police officer in the interaction, I don't know if he was actually even cut, but this young man went towards the police officer with the knife. And so finally they took him away, and I'm pretty sure they probably even took him away, and he may even been arrested that night, but they ended up charging him with assault on a government official, which is a severe charge. It's a really, that's a charge that is used to show someone that very disrespectful of a government official, and that's an order. We need to keep order. And I appreciate that is a charge that's available, but it just baffled me that when you have a young man who's not in his right mind, not capable of being responsible for his own actions at that time, because he was, pretty much out of his mind. And the interaction with this knife was not that him trying to attack somebody, it was he was trying to take his own life. And so that in itself was, that interaction, I feel like, is one that had this been someone that had a crisis intervention team, what they call the CIT, and we might, get a chance to talk about that a little bit later, but that this wasn't a team that came in with a social worker, and this wasn't a team that came in and tried to de-escalate. They came in full force, power blazing to subdue the bad guy, is how he was treated. And so then, and once that happened, then this family's left in a position where they don't know what to do if this person gets in trouble later, because they don't want to call the police. They don't want to ask for help because they're afraid of what's going to happen.
White coats will come and take me away, or I'll go to jail.
Yeah.
Or I'll cop a charge and I'm already suicidal and emotions are raging. Terror of trauma is engaged. You're right. When you say there's a lot happening all at once, that might be an understatement. Yeah. Wow. So
then sadly, this same young man, he ended up going to jail for a few years. He was released from jail. And after he was released from jail, there was no support network. He when the family was working with him to have a home plan, if they were scrambling to get a home plan that could be approved, they didn't want to approve a particular apartment because it didn't have this certain thing it needed. But if that apartment wasn't approved, then they were going to put him on the street or in a homeless shelter. And it was an impossible transition from jail. Once he got out, there was no support network for him. There was, especially, to get him into some type of therapy. And then he ended up in a position where he, once again, the family was concerned about him. thought
Okay,
he might be
hold on there quick. So you're kind of talking, this is now, what, couple
5
few
years later.
years after, and,
Yeah.
and life has kind of continued on. I mean, and I think the thing that I want to kind of point out there is when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, like, you got to understand, this isn't a one-off event. This is not a bad moment. This is a process that people go through. Craig, you're usually kind of up on the news. Do you remember in the state of Virginia, there was a senator or someone, and I think it was Virginia, that had a son, and they had chronic mental health issues, and they were constantly trying to get treatment and whatnot. And probably about 4 years ago, is this ringing a bell for you at all?
No, not at all.
Not at all. So like 4 years ago or so, yet another one of these events kind of that you're kind of talking about, Carole, occurred, and it ended up being a suicide. And the senator, I mean, it's a senator,
Is that Senator Craig Deeds? His son stabbed him. Is that the one you're talking about? Or is that
Maybe
something?
so. I think so. That does sound familiar. So my point there is, though, I mean, this is a family that's got resources. This is a family that, you would assume can engage treatment and whatnot, but they had a terrible scene such that you're kind of describing.
Well, it's interesting you say this is a well-off family, because I have another example. I don't know the details on this incident that happened, but I had a neighbor, and my neighborhood, it's a pretty nice neighborhood and gated community, golf course, and so people, just like I said, they're pretty well off in there. And there's one of my neighbors, and she's very open about the struggles that her son has, and so that it can be something to help others. And she was in a situation where she had to call the police or call assistance before. And this was this last time that she had to call for assistance. And she just had posted something on social media, and I reached out to her, in regards to how she was treated. She was treated like a criminal. Her son was treated like a criminal. And it's not even a case where he was like brandishing a weapon or getting really violent. It's just that it would just come in with no compassion. And it's the same thing. I think this is a situation where it doesn't matter how much money you have or you don't have. If you have police officers responding to a scene with someone in the midst of a mental illness, mentally ill episode, it's not good. It's going to end badly. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, who you are.
Well, it occurs to me as you're coming in onto the scene, it might not be without compassion. A good way of saying it might be on complete guard with fear and concern for what you're coming in to deal with.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good way to word it, because I don't want to speak to the heart of, that I'm sure people go in and they have compassion, and
there's fear.
Yeah, and there's fear, and rightfully so. There are these are dangerous situations, and that's what I said. I don't attest to have all the answers. And these are really hard problems to solve, but we're not going to solve them if we don't start making the efforts. And I think for me, what I can offer is that my experiences, and the fact that I said the most important thing is, people who are mentally ill and people with addiction issues, and better than me, I'm assuming does that have a DS9 code, or what the mentally? Yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah. That's mental illness. I want to make sure. I didn't want to. And the thing is, I'm just not geared to be a judgmental person. I just am the type of person that sometimes, to a fault, will give people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm glad I'm that way, because having people that I know and I love and deal with, even specifically addiction, if someone has bipolar, I think that there is some chance that they're going to have a little more compassion, judgmental people for someone with bipolar, maybe, but someone with addiction, they're just ready to throw them out and dismiss them more so. And it's a vicious cycle. And I know it's very frustrating dealing with someone with addiction, because you want them to get help and they don't want to get help. But it's interesting, because this same young man, we get 5 years down the road, he gets released from prison. He starts to spiral. The family's afraid, a family member afraid to call the police or what to do. Things got so bad, and they were so concerned, they took him to an emergency room. And he was having some issues with, he was finally at a point where he wanted to get help. He thought he was going there to get admitted. He was willing to have some kind of assistance. And he went in there, and basically by the time he was dropped off in the emergency room, and so, someone went around the parking lot, and 30 minutes later, they had him out on the sidewalk. They didn't do anything for him. So when the family member took him back in and said he needs help, he needs some medicine. In this particular case, he had some feeling of like itching that was really bad. And the family member said, you need to give him something. And the doctor said, well, let me look into that. That should work. And the doctor, left, didn't come back. The nurses come in to dismiss him and don't give him anything for this specific itching. And of course, this is a short version of a much longer story.
Right.
But coming to the police, when all of a sudden the person that was with this young man, they look outside, there are 5 or 6 police standing outside the door. So finally they're like, you know what, let's just go. If you're not going to give him the medicine, that's fine. Let's just leave. So he's there needing help, willing to accept it. And the police show up outside. And so they walk out the door. The police follow them out the door. And then when they get in the car to leave, there's a police that follows them down the road that stops them to check their credentials and license and stuff. The young man wasn't driving, but the other family member.
Wow.
And,
yeah.
and I think, that was a situation, kind of a wake up call with, oh, so, when this person, that I spoke to about, like, with the police and adjusting funds and having funds for more social work type interaction. They're like, I can see that now, because instead of having 5 police out there, there could have been a crisis intervention team that could have spoke for this young man, de-escalate. And in this case, the situation really wasn't even escalating, except for the family member trying to advocate for this young man who needed help.
But what kind of emotions and what kind of, so you're talking about your sister there, and
my sister was there with, this family member.
Okay. And so how do I want to get at that? So you obviously weren't there is what I was getting at. So, but do you know of the emotions they were feeling and what they were kind of reliving, should I say? Or
yeah, so
because I'm seeing years later, we're in this situation, and it like reflects back to that from before in the here and now, and all of that plays together. So I guess I'm trying to get at, like, well, what was experienced by
and
them?
that was my sister. She was the one who was with the young man, the family member, and she was hesitant because of what had happened to him before to even call anybody, to bring him to the hospital, to do anything. But because she was just at the end of her rope, didn't know what to do. And he was willing and expecting that this was going to get him help. So she, she's like, okay, we're going to do this. And she went in. So once they were in that room, and they pretty much just looked at him at a drug addict and kicked him out the door. They weren't even exploring the option that maybe this is that 1 in 100 time that this person is going to get help or ask for help. Drug addicts recover. I don't know the statistics. You would know better than me. And it may be 95% don't recover. I don't know. But we're going to throw away. What if it is the one? I mean, even Jesus, to get on my, religious soapbox.
There you go. Go, sister.
It's like, so he went after the one lamb that was lost. And if we can create a system, in this case, if there had been something, it's like, okay, we have a drug addict in the ER, and let's consider that as a mental illness. We've determined that is what it is. So you're going to treat this with a crisis intervention team to at least explore the option of maybe this is the 1 in 100 that's in here to get help and not to get drugs.
Well, and let me speak to that for a moment, because Carole, you touch on something there that's very important. From very early on in my career, I hated the notion, as I was learning about drug and alcohol addictions. See, back in the 90s, the 80s and 90s, Craig, I think we've talked about early treatment where it was very confrontive and very forceful and very, break them down and break the denial out. Remember how we've kind of talked about that? Well, there's this expression, you can't lead a horse to water. You can't get a horse to drink and whatever.
You can lead him to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right. That's the expression that I've always heard. And right all the way back when I was a DUI instructor, I was a little bit more idealistic than I have than I am now, and a little bit more naive. But I still believe what I was thinking back then, because that drove me nuts. And I added a line to that phrase because it bothered me. And I would say, yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, but you can make them thirsty.
Yeah.
You can make them thirsty. And I believe that to this day. And there's a certain amount of jadedness. There's a certain amount, there are clinicians that just cannot stand to work with substance abuse in my field, or they don't like to work with, borderline personality disorder folks, or different things that are frustrating because people do relapse. People have a hard times, things that people really struggle with and fall back into bad behaviors with, it's a tough issue, but pedophilia, right? Or sex addiction. There's these issues that people are just like freaked out about, weirded out about. And drug and alcohol addictions is a big one of them in the legal profession and in the first response profession and in the mental health and therapy profession ourselves. And if you begin to realize that people can get well, and we begin to wrap our conversation around re-equipment and dealing with our own feelings of frustration, our own feelings of fear about mental health, our own feelings of anger and fear towards somebody who's an addict, because they seem like really terrible people. I mean, they'll steal your grandmother's TV. But Craig, if you think about our show when we did the book Fearless, Jim was with us. Hey, Jim, he's in Nashville now. You remember Jim? Mm-hmm. And how that show ended? I get stories like that, I guess, listening audience in my office that I want you to understand, that I try to convey, like, Jim got his wife back after being divorced a couple times, at least once, and got a promotion for his job. He was 5 years sober from cannabis addiction, and he shared very courageously on our show, man. I don't know how much you remember his story, Craig, but I mean, he was living in garages and he was kind of a bad dude, and he got well. And we really don't know, Carole, as you say, like, when is that moment that somebody gets well? When is that event where it snaps them and they never use again or whatnot?
I think, that's the point, is that they're not going to find that opportunity unless there are people in the profession that can help them, ready to at least give, a couple minutes to whether this is that moment. And I think in this particular instance, when my sister's with this family member, you have someone in this situation advocating for this young man, and she couldn't get anywhere with them. Where are people that don't have someone advocating? But, it's like, why? It's just, if there had been someone to just say, to consider that maybe he's ready to accept some help now. And it just makes me sad. Unfortunately, I don't have, like I said, I don't have all the answers. But I
will say this. There's also the other side of the coin. Okay. I'm not a pacifist therapist. I tell this to people in my office all the time. Like, you're not going to find a lot of passivity, and when I'm working with you in a therapy process, I'm also challenging you. Right. Like, the responsibility is yours. The responsibility is for you to create that moment where you get well. And so there's a lot of personal accountability, which is part of what goes into policing. We don't like to talk about that difficult part, but people do need to be held accountable for what their actions are and how they're operating. And just because you have addiction doesn't mean you can steal your grandmother's TV. And I'm going to say, oh, that's okay. You have addiction. So, I hope you enjoy that TV. I hope you get well next time when you steal the car or whatever. Like, oh, no. It doesn't work that way neither. Right. So and that's where, that grinding in our society kind of goes. If you just, your audience can't see me, but my fists are just grinding amongst each other because, the compassion and the wellness that is possible in any given moment, coupled with the personal responsibility that somebody has. And guess who is right smack in the middle of that? Police officers.
Absolutely.
It's a tough place to be, I'll tell you.
And I think, just like you said, it's like, at what moment is someone ready, specifically for, in regards to addiction, where there is some hope of a recovery. Well, and even with mental illness, it's kind of the same situation, that there are people who are mentally ill who, unlike drug addicts who need to quit taking drugs, there are people who are mentally ill that need to realize they need to take the drugs. So I think there's an epiphany moment for both those groups of people. And the more people who are trained to recognize the moment where someone might be able to do that, or are trained to bring these people to the water to make them thirsty, the more opportunities we have for people to be able to get better. Because I think that sometimes it is just that moment. If you don't catch somebody right at that moment where at their rock bottom, they're ready to do the hard work and to just flip that switch. In this case, I don't know if this could have been that moment for this young man in the emergency room, but it could have been that if someone had that discussion to see if he was ready for the hard work, or do you need help? You recognize that. And he could have said yes, gone into a program in a perfect world, and things gotten better. That may not have been the case, but possibly if someone had given him that opportunity, it could have been. So I think that's the importance of having more people trained to work within these situations, and to recognize how to help people.
Carole, forgive me if
under the funding. Then that's
well, funding's always, we may hopefully try to get to that. But Carole, forgive me if I go too direct, but I can't help it. Sometimes it's what I do. Can you speak to just kind of, as a family member, and as you shared yourself with mental health challenges and whatnot, kind of watching this, what do you go through kind of watching these events? Because I'm sure we've talked about 2 now, but there's probably been several, that you've seen just with this one family member. But what are you experiencing with it from your angle?
Well, so there are a lot of different, so specific to my family, even with this young man, he has with addiction issues. And, in that case, it just makes me sad. And some part of me has to I'm the type of person that when there's a crisis, I don't react. I'm not real emotional. I'm just like, no nonsense. And when I was younger, I used to think maybe something's wrong with me. I should be crying right now. Like I had, even like with this young man, when he's got in trouble and things happen, and instead of crying about it, I'm just like very stoic. But I just kind of put up walls, but on the inside, it just makes me feel hopeless. Mm-hmm. Because, I'm not sure how I can help. And then when I had, I can't guide other family members on how they might want to deal with the situation. And then even, for family members.
That sounds like a certain sense of helplessness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then, there's another family member that dealt with situations that within his family unit that he wasn't able to live peacefully. And so he was in a situation where the that family unit, that they're like, well, being in this home, it may not be a good situation. And, you never want to say that you have to put one of your family members out of the home, or that family member in this case wanting to leave and then not knowing where they're going. So it's all of those situations make me sad, but it also makes me more, if there were just more ways to help or more options. I just feel like I'm one to give advice, but I don't even know what to say because, because there aren't a lot of options. And I feel for people like yourself who are in this business, because if there's someone who's ready, to go into it's not like you can just say, I'm a drug addict, I'm ready to get clean, I want to go into a program. It's not that easy. It doesn't work like that.
Go ahead, Craig. Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, and then I'll come over to you because we've talked about on the show, from a parent perspective. Now you're not a parent, I guess you're talking about your family, but the best thing that I've gotten to, because you're right, there's a grind there too. If I take my hands again and grind, accountability of what somebody's doing with their behavior and mental health versus the compassion for working with them. And then we had a lady named Linda Hacker that was on our show a couple months ago, and she was dealing with her son, and it was heroin addiction. And the best landing spot that I've gotten to with that kind of thing, Carole, is, you know, when you look at having a child struggle with these things and their behavior, just, you know, illegal behavior and all sorts of things, you wonder, you know, people do, they just say, you know, hey, kick them out, kick them to the street, kick them to the side, because they're beating you down, they're stealing your TV, they're wrecking your life, they're wrecking your family, and you cannot allow that to happen. And that is true. But so my landing spot is, it is reasonable to provide home and food at a minimum for your loved one, unconditional, no matter what they do. Never kick them out, but only provide those two things. But it's also reasonable to absolutely say you can't live here. That's it. And it gets to that point of needing to be done. That needs to be executed.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's it's so hard. And I've seen family members have to go through that as well, and make that decision or agonize over that decision.
And honestly, that's what we're doing as a society with a person, man or woman, who is just not acting in a way that we can allow. It's reasonable, just the same as it is for a parent. And that's a tough reality to really swallow, but it gets right down to that point. And again, mental health and substance abuse right in the middle of that. What are you thinking, sir?
Well, I'm hearing what you guys are saying, and Carole, you know, I've got a lot of experience with family members and friends who are addicts, so I can sympathize with a lot of the things that you're saying. But let's bring it back to, how do we tie that to reframing the term defunding the police? Where are we going with that?
Yeah, you know what I was starting to think about as we're going on. I mean, I might make this a part two. I don't know how you feel about it, Craig. We can kind of kick it around. You know, I've got a lot of thoughts about a lot of that, and I'm thinking I feel a part two coming on with this, where you and I kick around some of those things. Yeah, we got a lot of show notes, and we got a lot of things that I've thought about and prepping for this and have been thinking about for a while. So I'm kind of feeling like we may do that. What says you?
Let's just see where it goes.
Yeah, because we do. I mean, we have a lot of topics, you know, here insofar as, you know, defunding and what that means and how do we equip, and, you know, and Carole, I understand that you know, you say it's funny, you don't have a lot of the answers.
Well, and I did have one other, I know we're kind of running short on my time with you guys. I do have another story that I want to share that has to do directly with a police interaction. So crisis intervention training is out there. There are police forces offering that. And I'm not sure how effective that is. And that might even be part of your part two, to do more research on that. But even Salt Lake City, where the young autistic boy that was just this past week that was shot, 13-year-old boy who was shot, and that was in Salt Lake City. And his mother had called because of an episode. And they offer, and when I was doing some research on that, they offered, I know it's like 2013, 2014, they were commended for their crisis intervention training. So I don't.
The department, you mean?
The department, that police department, Salt Lake City Police Department. And so this could have been an isolated incident that outside of that training, and this still happened, or it could be that it was training that was implemented that wasn't followed. I can't speak to it exactly, but the training's there. But in order to do training, there needs to be funding for people to be training. And to have a crisis intervention team, you need to have personnel that are specialized in that area, which is going to take them away from other areas. So there has to be staffing. So that's where we're funding and things that directly need to be funded. But
yeah, you know, and the thing is, I can speak to that a little bit. You know, I've talked about this with my own personal family and friends and whatnot, because it's a big issue in our country. You know, we started in about the 80s. As a matter of fact, you remember John Pope? Craig?
Yeah, John.
John, who's a colleague of mine at my current agency, he's across the hall from me. He actually was a part of the very first funding efforts for mobile crisis teams in the country. Like he was receiving and getting those grants and setting those programs up. John's got some age, Carole. He's not a young chicken. He's been with us for a while, and he actually set those up. And honestly, he probably, was doing and creating those programs wherever he was at the time, at the same time that I was just out of school, being one of the employees doing that work. So I worked at a mobile crisis team, Carole, in West Virginia, and we do have those programs. And you're right that they can be beefed up, and that's part of what I have as far as a thought process, to some of the things that would be helpful. Mobile crisis teams are a great part of the solution and the answer, I believe, because we are trained. Like, I did that. I was on scene. And in West Virginia, we did mobile, what we called mental hygiene commissioner commitment hearings. So 2:00 at night, whatever time of day or night, we would go out and we'd literally have a whole court case there, Craig, where we'd have like a judge who was a mental hygiene commissioner, and they would receive the information and receive the data about the circumstances that were in there. And they would decide whether or not right then and there, if they were going to be transported to the facilities. And sometimes the mental hygiene commissioner would be like, no, we're not doing this. This doesn't hold up. We're not, and that would went in right there, because there were sometimes some crazy situations where some wife was upset at the guy and they fabricated some crazy events, and it didn't hold up because part of this, we talked about the homicidal and suicidal ideation and the complicated moral and legal and the intersection that all had. Do you remember? That's been a while ago. You remember any of that? That's a complicated process to get into, because you're talking about taking somebody's civil liberties away, such that when he was in the hospital, Carole, we might have made the decision that he doesn't now have any ability to make any decisions for himself, because we're going to take that liberty away on our assessment that he's not well. That's a big deal to do that.
Absolutely. And can't be done lightly.
No.
And hence going back to having training and a unit with checks and balances within that unit. That, is so important.
Boom, boom, boom. And on a spot of a dime, this has got to happen like now.
Absolutely.
That's the complicated nature of these situations that just come from nowhere.
So one other story so when I was in high school, there was a young man that I was young in those days in high school. And after high school, I had heard in a small town and heard that he was dealing with mental illness. And in 2002, I heard the story that he died. He was at an appointment, my understanding was at a therapist, and busted through a glass window from the therapist when he realized that he was going to go back to the hospital, or they're going to try to make him take medicine once he busted out of there, then the police were involved to subdue him. Within 7 minutes after him leaving that clinic, he was dead.
I'm sorry?
He was dead. The police, they got him down on the ground there, and there was someone commented about they could stop kicking him or stop hitting him. There was a comment about that. After many, like 8 months, finally the family was able to get some information about the autopsy, and they said it's the same type of condition that athletes will drop dead suddenly from overexertion, AV nodal, and something like that. But and it appears that the police interaction with this, and I'll say is, I looked on the internet and found this information, and there's a book that his sister wrote from notes, and I wanted to share a quote from him. That's why I was bringing this up. So this is all public information. So the young man's name is Charles Anthony Hayes, is what is on the book, and a book called A Towering Man by his sister, by Rachel Hayes. And this interaction with the police, it's even since he died, it's just something in the back of my head. And then with the preparation for the show, I just came across it when I was Googling, this one article came up.
Okay.
And it appears that is something that could have been de-escalated. And then after this interaction, that was 2002. And then as I researched this small town where this happened, they implemented crisis intervention training in 2010. That was 8 years later. And so, but anyway, the biggest thing that would be nice is if people could understand people with mental illness, people with addiction issues, somebody loves them. They're somebody's son, somebody's daughter. They're a human being. And so if somehow we could dig deep if we're in a situation that we have to interact with these people, that we could try to find that love like Mother Teresa had, for everybody. And so this young man, Tony, Charles Anthony Hayes, he said, he wrote that he believed communication was possible between the chemically balanced and unbalanced. It just takes a clean heart and attentiveness. Those with heavy and unusual brain activity can spot fear of false behavior. They, or that is we, don't respond well to it. Humble, wise, and sincere behavior works best. Refrain from wide-eyed, well-intentioned condescension. So this was writings that his sister had found, and she put into a book after he passed. But
okay, you want to read that one more time? Well, I don't catch all that. Say that again and highlight that a little bit.
So he said he wrote that he believed communication was possible between the chemically balanced and unbalanced. It just takes a clean heart and attentiveness. Those with heavy and unusual brain activity can spot fear of false behavior. They, or that is we, don't respond well to it. Humble, wise, and sincere behavior works best. Refrain from wide-eyed, well-intentioned condescension.
There's a mouthful there, I think, in that. And I think that kind of plays off onto what we were talking about before, with the idea of you don't know when that moment is when somebody's going to get well, and that magic moment might be this moment. And it's neat that they say, the minds can meet in that time. When we have crisis situations, I have found, here's a little bit of a thought. I was just listening to you, Carole, and I was kind of going at with this idea of equip the police. And I do want to talk probably about a lot of ideas that I have that are very specific to that, because I have become to believe that you have the most potential to have a major life course change in a major crisis event. Now you think about that. I have found that in my career, and I really miss doing that crisis work, because when I was doing that crisis work, I was very aware of the fact that I was in that moment. And the reality of it is, we might have, in the idea of re-equipping the police, an opportunity to really tap into getting really a lot better at a lot of moments that might be magical moments for people in mental health that can absolutely get well from that. So maybe, I'm going to start changing my thought process a little bit and taking this from that angle as actually an opportunity that we have, with all of the questions that we have that are going on around now, and the discussions that we're having with BLM and, defunding the police. And I'm trying to say re-equipping the system to operate better. This might be a really awesome opportunity to take some steps in growth as a society in our journey in what we're managing.
It's interesting. So with what has recently been going on since George Floyd died, and now Daniel Prude, and being Black men, African American, whichever terminology is preferred.
It's fine.
Exactly. So I had begun to think, what you probably had begun to think, just like I said, mental illness is in the middle of all this. And this crisis, which is a time that makes change available and people may be open to change, the changes that need to be made, my opinion, and it seemed for Black Americans to be treated better in these situations by the police, is the same mindset and training that would make police be better equipped, or a team, to deal with mental illness. It's perception of the person you're dealing with. If you perceive this person, that this person in front of you is a human being just like other human beings who deserve a chance for you to show them the best that you can do for them right now, whether they're Black, whether they're mentally ill, whether they're white. And so I just think that the training that's going to make the situation better when apprehending, the criminals, is going to be the same training that will help when dealing with mental illness as well. I kind of rambled a little bit there, but I just think that it's a good time to go hand in hand, since mental illness is right in the middle of so much of the situation right now.
So, Carole, are you talking about retraining police officers to deal with mentally ill people, or are you talking about sending Chris Gazdick in to deal with the guy who has a mental health issue?
So, and I mentioned this to Chris when we were preparing for this. I'm in my mid-50s. I grew up with a very favorable impression of police in my situation. I personally didn't have bad experiences with police officers. And so, before these last 6 or 8 months, I was like, oh, they're sure, there's many good police, there's bad police, and which may still be the case. But I will say, and I mentioned to Chris, that I have 2 millennial daughters, and their experience is not that there are any good police. That they feel pretty strongly that any of their interactions my children are educated and they work, and not children have had interactions with, been in trouble with the law, but just with friends that have had interactions with police and different things that have happened, they don't have a favorable opinion of police, and they feel like the whole system needs to be done away with and they need to start from scratch. So that's made me think more. I think there's a left and there's a right, and you need to meet in the middle. So that's made me feel like more that, yes, we do need people like Chris to be on a team when you're when you're responding to a situation where there's someone who is having a severe mental episode, and that running naked outside out of their mind, which I came across multiple of those stories and interactions with police where the person ended up dead. I think, yes, you need someone more than just a police officer who's had 40 hours of training. I think it's important that they have that 40 hours of training or to have some concept, but I think there are situations where you need a team of people who've had years of training and experience as well to deal with the more difficult situations. Kind of goes back to what Chris said too. Those decisions are made in the moment. When they get a 911 call, someone's got to determine what team do we send.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Craig.
Well, I would say that there are good police. Some of my best friends are police, and one of my best friends in the world is a police officer. So there are definitely good ones. And my interactions in the past, apart from one, has been really good. And even the bad one, the guy was, he was just not very friendly, So it wasn't that he slapped me around or anything. The other thing I would say is, and Chris and I talked about this the other day, is my concern with sending Chris in somewhere, is what did you say? The big naked guy will kill him. I mean, you send Chris into a situation where a guy has a weapon and somebody's going to get killed. So my vision of what it would look like is it would be to train police officers to deal with these crisis kind of situations.
I don't disagree. I think police officers need to be trained. It's the same situation. If you have a situation, and I get a lot of my information from watching police procedurals, but before firefighters go in to deal with the situation, if there's guns ablazing, the police have to clear that it's safe. So I think similar type of measures could be put in place so that people like Chris could go into a situation. Now, there are many situations that, I've perused and read where there's a perceived, someone thinks it looks like they have a weapon, but it turned out that it was, it was a cell phone and different situations like that. So I think that police can be trained, but I think that there are also situations where you are going to, you could safely use a crisis intervention team.
Yeah. So listen, I have a lot of thoughts about this. And I think part of what I decided a little while ago is I kind of wanted to put a little bit of a story on this and a little bit of a face on kind of what it is that we're dealing with. And I know we don't have a name, and that's fine. We totally respect that. Our name is Carole, with the family and multiple experiences with this. I think that, we will most certainly talk about this again soon, quite possibly. Craig and I will bounce our heads together and see what we want to do. But, when you put a mental health clinician in the scene, that changes the dynamic all told altogether. just by the nature of the police are going to act differently. The patient, I look at them as clients, are going to act differently. And so am I going to act differently when the police are there. There is a triangle here that can be very different than a power one-on-one, long arm of the law coming to take me down and I'm suicidal and I'm going to go out with a blaze of fury. You put some other elements into that picture and that's going to be a very different flavor. It's going to be a very different experience. And I just want to lay down through this list. Part of what I'll throw out, is, we didn't get to talk about a lot of the thoughts that I have, and I got a super lot of them, but we will get to that listening audience, I promise. Probably not as much today, but what should we fund? Because Carole, you talked about funding, right? Funding is a big part of this. And I've been battling this, Craig, as a mental health clinician my entire life, because, guess what we are? The redheaded stepchild of the healthcare industry. You know how many people want to pay for healthcare? In my career, half of my career, we didn't even have the ability to have insurance companies pay for therapy and mental health treatment. You had mental health benefits not be a part of your policy. You would come to me, I got Blue Cross Blue Shield, Chris. Well, yeah, but your product doesn't have mental health and substance abuse benefits. Sorry, so you have to pay cash. That is not more than like 10 years ago. So you want to talk about funding? Yeah, you'll get my blood up because I've been dealing with that for a long time. What do we want to fund? Community mental health centers that they don't exist anymore because we downgraded, insane asylums, so to speak, to create mental health centers to treat people in the home so they're not in hospitals. But now we don't have community and mental health centers that are bigger agencies. We got a bunch of small little therapy agencies that try to do the same thing that mental health centers do. Do we want to fund therapists? There's going to be contracts for that. Greg, you're going to have to pay me if you're going to get me on a team to go with that because I'm kind of happy in my job right now. Do we want to fund DSS? Because Department of Social Services has a lot of expertise in dealing with children on site, particularly on a murder scene or something that's been traumatic for a kid. The DSS professionals can be a part of that, but people are afraid of that. They're not going to come in and take the kids away. Do we want to fund universities for training and get our brightest minds in research to kind of come into this situation and get universities tagging into police departments for help? Do we want to get Planned Parenthood? What about private investigators with human sex trafficking? How, we've talked about that before. We got job training with community colleges. Do we get boys and girls clubs? Is that a community resource? The CDSA, my wife works for the Community Child Development Services Administration to get, families that are struggling with, developmental delayed kids because they have a lot of police interaction from time to time when they're raging in their developmental delays. Do we get just gyms for exercise? Gyms are pretty important for healthcare, right? Exercise. And the list can go on and on and on as I just started to brainstorm, like, what do, and I did that list, Craig, because I want to get us talking. I think I want to frame this as an opportunity. When we talk about defunding the police, people generally are talking about, and I think it's a much better word, re-equipping. I mean, I feel like we're talking about reallocating.
I think it's a term that definitely that will have people have more of an open mind. I have a question for Craig. So you have friends that are police. So my question is, do you think they feel like they're equipped to deal with mentally ill, or would they feel like they might benefit from more training, or do they already get it?
Well, I want to comment real quick too. They do get a lot of stuff. Departments have been on this, guys.
Yeah.
They've been working on it. It's not like they're just flat-footed here. I do want to say that.
Carole, I don't know. I've never had those conversations with them, and I haven't talked specifically about their training protocols, so I don't know the answer to that question. But I'll ask some of those guys.
Yeah, because and just to clarify that my statement I made is that I also know police officers that I respect, and I feel like that it's to their benefit as well to be put in a position where a situation doesn't escalate and something terrible happens. So
yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I was looking up the statistic after you guys were talking earlier, and it does say, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, more than half of those in the criminal justice system suffer from a mental illness. So I definitely think that having people who are equipped to deal with mentally ill people would be definitely beneficial. I think that at least from Chris and I may disagree on how to deliver that service. I think that probably somebody who can also deal with somebody who could do them harm is better equipped to have that knowledge no offense, than somebody like Chris, who may be a sitting duck to a guy who's jacked up on whatever
meth or whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. And exactly. I mean, and it's like, let's go back to the situation with this family member that has a knife to his throat. So if you have a mental health person coming into this situation, he's in a room getting ready to slit his throat. You could have a social worker or someone equipped to help de-escalate, which could possibly be a specialized police officer that has specialized training. It's not like someone's going to throw the knife across the room and hit this person and kill him. So in that situation, we need to keep our public servants safe who are dealing with situations as safe as possible anyway.
Oh yeah, and I get that. Let me just clarify there. So Chris and I had this conversation the other day about this topic, and he said, well, when somebody who's in crisis sees a police officer, they immediately puts them up to a different level of anxiety. And so I'm thinking what he's saying is he's going to go in that room alone without the assistance.
No.
I'm like, no, you're not.
No. Yeah, let me speak to this, guys, because I did this. This was my first job. And honestly, that sucks because I was a green clinician and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't know what the hell I was. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you this story real quick. It was in a whole different state. Well, people know what state I was from. Doesn't matter. It was in a different municipality in a different state, but it was one of those holy shit, what am I going to do now moments because this wasn't in the textbook. It was like my first foray into this whole world. And it was a simple call that the jail had made, and it was doing a suicide assessment on this gentleman. And it freaked me the hell out. Okay, it freaked me the hell out because they brought me down into the jails and kind of walked me through, and nobody was really comforting to me. Nobody was really like, hey, it's okay, this is what we're gonna do, whatever, and they were just like pretty nonchalant and honestly not very kind to me at all. And they called me to come and do this, but I'm walking through the doors are clanking, and you're in the jails. I don't know if you've ever been in a jail, Craig, but it's kind of a scary place. It's really pretty jacked up. And they lead me down a few corridors and stuff, and they get to this one cell, and they say, okay, here he is, and they just walked away and they left me. I remember looking at that like, okay, you want me to talk to this guy? Dude, I had no idea what to do. No idea. And so unfortunately, and I did, and I figured it out. I mean, I talked to the guy, I assessed him, I figured out, it kind of started to come back to me after I talked to him because he was literally in a fetal position in a corner over there in a padded cell, And so the point that I started to lead there is we do need more experienced clinicians because I do know what to do in those situations. And I think I am going to be effective at being able to de-escalate that situation, but I'm not going up in there by myself when somebody's all hyped up and jacked up on what I don't know and has weaponry. I'm going to go in there with a police officer and I'm going to be talking, and the police officer is going to be validating my experience and presence there. And he's going to be there if it's needed. And I'm going to be able to, because I'm trained in MANT. That was one of the first trainings I had in mental health centers. Forget what MANT stands for, but it's personal defense. Like I know where my hand positions are. I know what's in the room. I'm thinking around about safety. We go through some of that.
Yeah, I still think that okay, so you go in there with an officer. I still think that officer needs some training though.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because he's going to have a different view of the situation than you are. And you might think, well, I've got this guy talked down. And he might think, well, this guy's still jacked up.
Yeah.
So you would need to be on the same page as the officer.
I need their training.
Yeah.
And they probably need my training.
Yeah.
And we need those positions.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, talking about how a police officer walks in, automatically the anxiety level for anybody, all of us. I mean, I'm doing 5 below the speed limit and go drive past a police officer. My anxiety level goes up. I was watching a video in regards to a crisis team, and the police officer in this particular team, there were 2 police officers who were in street clothes. They had their badge around their neck, but other than that, their weapons were not visible. And they made a point of saying, we wear street clothes, our weapons aren't visible. They were on the forefront dealing with the person they had gotten called to help. And then at the door, there actually was an officer who was in uniform. So I think to offer what you were saying, the full picture, like you have the officer in uniform to show someone to try to keep things in order. But the people closest, the police officers who were closest to the gentleman that was having an episode, they were in plain clothes and had been trained in this program that the video was about.
You know what's funny? You talk about Carole plain clothes. Craig, I got an awesome metaphor, and this is fresh off my brain right in this moment, to be honest with you. Did we just lose Carole?
Yes.
Oh dear, we just lost Carole on the Zoom. We're going to have to try to fix that. Let me go into my thought though, and we'll try to bring her back. And you know, although she might want to hear this too. Why don't we
go
pause?
ahead and then
You want
to recap if she comes back.
She might not know that she can click that same link. If you want to try to call her, Craig, I got the number on the notes up top. So here's my metaphor, though, that is a complete change, and it's actually pretty freaking cool, I think. Real fresh in the live brain of mine. So she was just talking about plain clothes and the way that you feel and how that can work and how you're operating. Think about a metaphor of what we did in changing this system, a different system, okay? We have a hospital system, and that's very similar to a police system. You know, she said you see a police officer and you start freaking out and things are kind of going all over the place. Well, the fact of the matter is when you go into a hospital, you also get massively freaked out and scared to death and whatnot, right? So immediately when I go into hospitals, because I had all kinds of problems when I was a kid, I had lots of medical problems. And, you know, every year I went in for tubes, and hospitals to this day make me edgy. I don't like going to hospitals. They give me the willies. Makes me very uncomfortable. But think about it. What have they done, Craig, to maternity units? You ever been into a maternity unit in a little while?
It's like a hotel.
They have absolutely redesigned, redefined, I'm going to use the word, they have re-equipped in a massively different way a hospital in maternity units. I don't mind walking into a maternity unit. Now, my oldest kid's 19 and my youngest was 15. So when my kid was 15, this is 15 years ago, I'm sure it's gotten a whole lot better now. You're right. When's the last time you've been in a maternity unit?
My daughter's 12.
Yeah, so you're
probably 12.
You're much more recent than I was.
Yeah.
They're really nice places, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely they are.
They got beds for the husband to sleep in, and they got rooms that are cushiony and nice TVs and comforting spaces. I get the willies when I walk into a hospital. I don't like the way they smell. I don't like the way they look. It makes me very uncomfortable. I'm not big on needles. I don't really like going to doctors anyway. When I go to a maternity unit, I got no problems, Craig. I'm comfortable. I'm actually at ease. I am de-escalated. How about that for a metaphor when we're looking at policing and re-equipping and going through a process maybe where we have these types of discussions and get this thing totally rearranged so that we can operate in a much different way than what we had before. Does that make sense?
It does.
Carole, we got you back. You just missed the whole. Yeah. That's okay. You just missed a whole segment. Craig, let's finish that up and finish up with Carole. What are you hearing with that? Because I think that is an awesome metaphor and exactly what is meant by defund the police.
I think you're talking about redoing how hospitals look to accommodating, and I agree 100%. You know, hospitals have no windows, no light. People are coming and going.
They're scary places.
All hours of the night. Yeah, they really are.
They really are.
They are. Yeah.
So are jails. So are police badges.
Yeah.
So are police cars.
I heard a lot there, and I almost think that there needs to be more money allocated. I think that these officers do need some crisis center training of their own potentially. And then what you said about the young man going to prison, if he's got a mental health issue, perhaps he should have gone to a hospital and gotten treatment as opposed to prison.
Yeah, I mean, and it was a complicated situation specifically because he had this charge against him. And then in the interim, they finally got a public prosecutor who said this is ridiculous. We need to fight this charge because he was having a mental illness episode. Well, in the meantime, he got in trouble with a different charge that he got convicted of, and so he couldn't go fight the charge against assault on a government official because he'd lost any bearing because he had another charge against him. He lost credibility.
Got you.
And so he lost the opportunity to fight that charge, which he could have possibly gone to court. But I will say, when my sister was advocating once again for this family member, she spoke to the officer who was the one that was the young man went at him with the knife. And that officer felt totally justified about that charge being brought against him, had no sympathy whatsoever for the fact that he, you know, had a mental illness, because this young man is not just, he's bipolar as well as having an addiction issue, and probably PTSD and things. I mean, he's had other trauma as well.
Sounds like a complicated picture.
Yeah, and so in this case, it was an officer who didn't show any sympathy for, you know, didn't seem to have an understanding for this young man. And I want to real quick go back to what Chris said. I am very strong believer of there are consequences to your actions and holding people accountable and walking that line with somebody, because when you're dealing with someone who's mentally ill or someone with an addiction, it's a constant balance of, can you not really help yourself, or are you just taking advantage or making an excuse? And so I agree that it's important to hold that person accountable for their actions in situations. But we also have to understand and try, when are they not able to?
An accountability / compassion balance. And that is one hell of a balance to try to make in life and death instances, not even seconds, right? Milliseconds and whatnot.
Yeah,
it's a
tough
deal.
situation. I know a guy that I grew up with who has dealt with addiction for 30 years now, it seems like. And he's been in and out of prison. And you know, in the beginning, he kind of played the game: rehab, relapse, rehab, relapse, rehab. And, you know, after a while, I'm a compassionate person too, but after a while, it wears on you.
It does.
And you begin to give up on the person. And, you know, 30 years have gone by. And if the guy came to me and said, "Hey man, I'm trying to get clean. Will you help me?" I absolutely, I would. But right now it's just like, you know, he's still out there and there's no reaching him. So it's like,
yeah, and
I can't do anything to help the guy anymore.
And you can imagine if you see that in one person and then another person and then another person and then another person and then another one and another one and another one and another one and another one. And maybe one gets well.
Yeah.
That's pretty debilitating. And that's what our guys and gals are dealing with.
That's going back to that compound trauma episode.
It is.
Yeah. If you're dealing with those multiple kind of people like my friend for long periods of time, you do get probably numb to
it comes back on you.
That kind of stuff.
It comes back on you hard.
Yeah.
As an officer.
Yeah. I actually had a girlfriend who her ex-husband was a police officer in another state. And we know this guy, he's a younger guy who was going to go to the police academy. And she said, "Oh, it'll change him." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Over time, it'll change it'll change him." And I always scratch my head. But I mean, I guess if you're saying that constantly dealing with those situations makes you numb and to those situations, then that's probably what she was talking about.
You almost have to, or you're going to crack. I mean, I can't tell you, I've had the distinct honor and privilege of working with people in our first responders systems, not just police officers, but military as well. And I can't tell you how much of an honor it is to work with those folks out there. And I mean that when I say that to anybody that might hear me that I've worked with you. It's been just an absolutely humbling honor, because it's such a dynamic emotional issue that goes on in their hearts and heads. And honestly, you know, going back to Carole, what you said, I mean, you asked, do they want help and do they understand that? I can tell you that yes, they do, emotionally as well as financially and resource wise. But there's also this weird thing of, I'm not going to admit that. I'm not going to let anybody else know that. Right. And so because who the hell wants to talk about that? You know, nobody wants to talk about that or recognize, you know, my difficulty or my challenge. I mean, therapists don't go to therapy, right? Hell no, I don't need no therapy. I do, in reality. Police officers do. Doctors do. Military professionals. You talk about SEALs all the time. SEALs do. They tell you that. We're reading a book right now that exemplifies that together, right?
I mean, and I think that goes back to the stigma of asking for help for our mental health. And it's kind of, you know, what I mentioned when I sent you kind of my bio or breakdown of me. You know, I raised my daughters. I come from a family with a history of mental illness. So I raised my daughters with an appreciation of mental health refers to everybody has mental health, and we want to have healthy mental health. And so we need to destigmatize the fact that sometimes you need to get help with your mental health, just like you get help with your physical health.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I raised my daughters to, you know, take care of themselves and do the healthy things and get your sleep and don't take drugs. But there also might come a point where you need to speak to a therapist and kind of process what, if you're having anxiety or you're, things that are stress.
Carole, I happen to believe that we're going to go towards a model in not too distant a future where we have a therapist, mental health professional that is just like your family doctor. Check in with them every quarter, every year, or every half year, or something like that. I absolutely believe that we're going to be going to that model. Great. Listen, we went longer today, and that's fine. I still have a super whole lot of thoughts about this, so I think that we want to hit it again. Are we at a place that we can start taxiing in, guys? Anything else that you want to say? And I want to talk with you a little bit about that, Carole.
Well, I think I wanted to just make the point that when you say defunding reframed, you mean allocating funds to different places within the police system. Is that?
Are you asking me personally?
Both of you, but yeah.
I'm talking about equipping. I'm talking about taking advantage of a national conversation to get a situation where it can help so many people in crisis situations and talk about re-equipping. The conversation needs to be had in a productive way so that we go down that list and figure out what is going to be a part of what's helpful. We can make progress. And I think that we have a unique opportunity, a very unique opportunity that we haven't had in a very, very long time, so that the shootings can stop happening and so that the suicidal behavior can be treated, so that the mental health that's right in the middle of this can get relief. Both from policemen and women need relief from their mental health problems. A society, we need relief from our citizens' mental health problems. It's on all sides, man. And I think that we are on a unique opportunity to deal with a lot of that.
I think at a minimum, I think every city, town is unique. And I think budgets need to be analyzed and see where money can be reallocated. Just like, I think people might be more willing to accept the fact that money needs to be reallocated to programs that could help people not end up in a situation where they're having a mental episode and have an altercation with police. And if some of that money can come from the police department, then that's good. But if some of that money comes from some other program, I think so I know that some of what I've read about different police departments who have Humvees and have all the, big equipments and like, I don't know specifics. I'm not an expert. So it would seem to me as a layman and stories that I've read that some of those police departments could, instead of being equipped with all this militarized type equipment, that money could be used because, is that something that we need to have, militarized type equipment?
Yeah, those are the discussions that we need to have.
Discussions that need to happen.
I'm not all necessarily going to agree that we need to get rid of the SWAT teams, because those guys, listen, there's some situations they come across, no doubt about it. But let's begin to taxi out here, and I think that the discussion that we have had, I hope has put a little bit of a face on, a little bit of a story on, which was my main point with our follow-up conversations. That Craig, you and I are going to have these personal conversations anyway. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I want to have some of our little analyzation. If you're agreement with that, Craig, we'll talk about it off the air and see what we want to do. But I want to talk about this more, and I want our nation to talk about it more, because I do think we have a unique opportunity to change hospitals like we did with maternity wards the way that we are. I think we could do something like that and begin to change police precincts in some ways similar. Carole, I know you didn't understand that, but you missed that segment, but that's okay.
I think I'm kind of on board with what you're saying, catching the tail end. So,
yeah. So Carole, we need to get out of here, but I want to thank you absolutely for the courage to share. We do a high five on Through a Therapist's Eyes. We can't do it because we're not in person. So we're going to give a clap here in a little bit. I'll count us down to 3, and the clap signifies a high five, because this is a big deal when you share. And I just really appreciate your openness and frankness and forthrightness and honesty and genuine caring for the issue that we've talked about tonight, because that's not easy to do. So I really want to recognize you for taking those steps. Like, that's a big freaking deal, right? That's a big deal.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So we're going to do a high five. We're going to clap here when I count down from 3, right? 3, 2, 1. Awesome. I appreciate it, Carole.
Thank you,
All
Carole.
right. Thank you so much.